Amara loved school field trips. They were her favorite part of the school year. She loved going out of the classroom and exploring with her friends. That day was no different. Everyone was excited as they visited a science museum. Amara, with her bright eyes and big laugh, was the star of her group. She always had a joke or a fun fact to share. But the fun didn't last. The accident happened during lunch. Amara was playing tag with her friends in the garden. She didn't see a loose stone and tripped over it. She fell hard on her arm. Pain shot through her like fire, and tears filled her eyes. Her teacher ran over quickly. In minutes, Amara was in the school van, heading to the hospital. By the time they got there, Amara's arm was swollen and hurting badly. She felt scared, but she tried to stay brave. Hospitals are supposed to be safe places, right? She thought the doctors would be kind and help her feel better. But what happened next was nothing like she imagined. The doctor who came to see her didn't even smile. He was a middle-aged white man with a serious face. He barely looked at her as he entered the room. He glanced at her arm quickly and mumbled something she didn't catch. Then, as he checked her arm, he said something that froze her in place. "Your skin makes it harder to see what's wrong. Dark colors always do," he said with a strange smirk on his face. Amara's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She looked at her teacher, hoping they would say something. But her teacher didn't react. They were too busy listening to the doctor talk about her arm. The doctor kept working, but Amara couldn't focus. His voice was cold and made her feel small. He acted like she was a problem he had to deal with. When her teacher asked a question, he answered quickly and impatiently. Amara felt invisible, like she didn't matter at all. After what felt like forever, the doctor finally wrapped up her arm. "It's just a sprain," he said flatly, handing her a prescription. Then he left without another word. No smile, no kind words, nothing. Amara just sat there, feeling hurt and humiliated. As Amara walked out of the hospital, her arm wasn't the only thing hurting. Inside, her heart felt heavy. She kept hearing the doctor's words in her head. For the first time in her life, she felt the pain of being treated differently because of her skin color. She didn't know how to explain it, but she knew it wasn't right. In the car ride home, Amara sat quietly in the back seat. Her teacher was driving. Outside the window, the world looked blurry. Not because they were going fast, but because tears were in her eyes. She looked at her bandaged arm. The pain there was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. The doctor's words kept playing in her mind, over and over again, like a bad dream. When she got home, Amara decided not to say anything about what happened. She didn't know how to explain it. Would her parents even understand? Or would they think she was making a big deal out of nothing? He was a doctor. After all, someone people trusted to help others. Who would believe he could be so unkind? Her parents were worried when they saw her. They asked her a lot of questions, but Amara forced a smile and said it was just a small sprain. The doctor said, "I'll be okay," she mumbled, not meeting their eyes. She didn't want to lie, but the truth felt too hard to share. That night, Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about the doctor. She remembered the smirk on his face, the sharp tone in his voice, and how he acted like she didn't matter. Her chest felt tight, and her eyes filled with tears again. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to be treated unfairly, and it hurt more than her arm ever could. Over the next few days, Amara wasn't herself. She was quieter at school and didn't laugh or talk as much as before. Her friends noticed. They asked if she was okay, but she just shook her head and said, "I'm fine, just tired," with a small fake smile. Inside, though, she felt like she was carrying a big, heavy secret she couldn't tell anyone. Her grades started to drop, and her teachers saw that she wasn't paying attention in class. At home, her parents worried because Amara spent most of her time alone in her room. She hardly joined family talks or played like she used to. Her parents thought it was just a phase, maybe too much schoolwork or the stress of growing up. But for Amara, it felt like there was a dark cloud following her everywhere, making her days feel dull and heavy. One evening, Amara sat at her desk pretending to do homework. She glanced at the mirror and saw her reflection. She stared at her deep brown skin and her curly hair. Usually, she loved how she looked, but this time, she felt a tiny pinch of shame. The doctor's words had stuck in her head. making her question something she had never doubted before. Amara decided to stay quiet. She told herself it was better this way. What if no one believed her? What if people thought she was just being dramatic? The fear of being ignored or told she was wrong kept her from saying anything. Her silence felt like a shield, but it was also a prison. Even though Amara stayed quiet, the feelings inside her didn't go away. At school, hearing kids laugh in the hallway reminded her of the doctor's cold, mocking tone. Going to the clinic for checkups made her stomach twist with fear. Her bright and colorful world now seemed gray and full of shadows. Deep down, she knew she couldn't keep these feelings inside forever. But for now, staying quiet felt safer. Soon, it was time for her follow-up visit to the hospital. Her parents said she needed to go to make sure her arm was healing properly. Amara didn't want to go, but she didn't say anything. The thought of seeing that doctor again made her feel sick, but telling someone about how she felt seemed too hard. When Amara and her mom got to the hospital, the waiting room was crowded. Babies were crying, people were coughing, and nurses were hurrying back and forth. Amara sat quietly with her hands squeezed together in her lap. Her mom didn't notice how nervous Amara was. She was busy reading a magazine while they waited. Finally, a nurse called Amara's name. Amara's heart dropped when she heard the voice. It was him, the doctor. His voice sounded just as cold and distant as before. Her mom got up to come with her, but the nurse smiled kindly and said, "Just the patient for now. We'll call you in if we need you." Amara followed the nurse, her steps slow and unsure. Her stomach felt tight, and her hands were sweaty. The nurse, a woman with warm brown eyes, noticed how nervous Amara looked. She smiled and said gently, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of you." The nurse's name tag said Olivia. She asked Amara some simple questions about her arm as they walked to the exam room. Olivia's voice was calm and kind. It made Amara feel a little better, even though she was still scared. When they reached the room, Olivia started unwrapping the bandages on Amara's arm. She noticed how tense Amara looked. "You're really quiet," Olivia said softly. "Is everything okay?" Amara didn't know what to say. Before she could answer, the door opened and the doctor walked in. He didn't say hello or even look at Olivia. He grabbed Amara's chart and barely glanced at her arm. Seeing him made all the bad memories from last time come rushing back. Amara sat still, feeling small and scared. "Looks fine," the doctor said quickly. He wrote something on the chart and handed it back to Olivia. "She doesn't need the bandage anymore. She'll be fine." Then he walked out without another word. Amara saw that same smirk on his face as he left. It made her chest feel tight all over again. Olivia watched him leave, her face showing a hint of frustration. Then she turned back to Amara. "That wasn't very nice of him," she said gently. Amara blinked, surprised. No one had ever said that before. She thought everyone at the hospital would defend the doctor, but Olivia didn't. Olivia's voice got softer, like she was sharing a secret. "You're not the first person he's treated like that," she said. "But you don't have to keep quiet about it. If something is bothering you, it's okay to talk about it." Amara felt her throat tighten, and tears filled her eyes. She had never heard anyone say something like that to her before. Not her parents, not her friends, not her teachers. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, someone would listen. I don't know," Amara whispered, her voice shaky. "He just makes me feel so small." Olivia placed her hand gently on Amara's shoulder. "You're not small," she said firmly, "and your feelings matter. If you ever want to talk about what happened, I'm here to listen." Amara didn't say much more during the visit, but as she left the hospital, Olivia's words stayed in her mind. For the first time since the accident, Amara began to think about speaking up. Maybe her voice could help, not just for herself, but for anyone else who had been made to feel the way she did. The rain tapped gently on Amara's bedroom window. It made a soft, steady sound that matched the thoughts spinning in her head. She sat cross-legged on her bed, her desk lamp glowing softly beside her. Her journal was open, but the pages were blank. She held her pen, not sure what to write. For days, Olivia's words kept coming back to her. "Your feelings matter." They were simple words said with kindness, but they felt like a lifeline. Amara kept wondering if they could really be true. Did her feelings actually matter? She sighed and stared at the empty page. It reminded her of the silence she'd been keeping since the accident. She thought about the doctor again, his smirk, the cold way he talked. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he made her feel. Small, invisible, unimportant. Amara touched her pen to the paper and started writing, slowly at first. Why did he say that? Why did he act like I didn't matter? I keep thinking about it, and it hurts every time. I don't think I'll ever forget the way he looked at me. The words came in little pieces. Writing them down made her feel a bit lighter, even though it also hurt. It was like pulling out a thorn, painful, but it felt like something she needed to do. She paused for a moment, then added, Olivia said it wasn't okay. She said I don't have to put up with it. But what if it happens again? What if no one believes me? As she wrote, her feelings started pouring out. She felt angry, sad, and confused all at once. But underneath all of that, something else was starting to grow. It was faint, but it was there, a small flicker of strength. Maybe Olivia was right. Maybe it was okay to feel hurt. Maybe her feelings really did matter. The next day at school, Amara sat quietly at her desk. Her teacher was explaining a math problem on the board, but her mind kept wandering. She looked around at her classmates. They were all busy writing in their notebooks like it was just another normal day. But for Amara, nothing felt normal anymore. At lunch, Amara sat with her friends under the big oak tree, like always. They were laughing and eating, but Amara was quieter than usual. As they talked, a group of older kids walked by, laughing loudly. One of the boys stopped and looked at Priya, a small girl in their group. Hey, aren't you the girl whose mom works at the diner? But she gets all the leftovers, huh? The boy said, sneering. Priya's face turned bright red. She looked down at her sandwich, her hands shaking a little. The boy laughed and walked away with his friends, not even noticing how much his words had hurt. Amara felt a sharp pang in her chest. Watching Priya's face reminded her of how she'd felt at the hospital. She wanted to say something, but her throat tightened and no words came out. Priya gave a weak smile, trying to laugh it off, but Amara could tell she wasn't okay. That evening, Amara went grocery shopping with her mom. At the checkout line, the cashier greeted them with a quick nod, not even looking at them properly. But when the next customer came, a cheerful, light-skinned woman, the cashier smiled warmly and spoke in a friendly tone. Amara noticed the difference right away. It made her stomach twist. She glanced at her mom, who didn't seem to notice anything. Amara wondered if things like this had happened before. Had she just never paid attention? Over the next few weeks, Amara started noticing these moments everywhere. A teacher would ignore her question in class, but praise another student for asking the same thing. People in stores would stare at her mom longer than they needed to. And every time the older kids teased Priya, Priya just laughed it off like it didn't hurt. But Amara could tell it did. It was like Amara was seeing the world differently now. She felt angry and helpless all at once. She didn't know how to make it stop, but she knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, Amara opened her journal again. She wrote quickly this time, It's not just me. It's other people too. I don't know why this happens, but it's not fair. I hate how it makes me feel. I hate how it makes other people feel. The words flowed out, and for the first time they felt a little clearer. Writing didn't fix everything, but it helped her sort out her thoughts. Even if no one else read what she wrote, it felt good to get it out. When she finished, Amara closed her journal and turned off her lamp. She lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. She still didn't know what to do or how to change things. But she knew one thing. She couldn't unsee what she had started to notice. The next day, Amara sat on the edge of the school playground during lunch. Her journal was tucked under her arm. She could hear the loud chatter of her classmates, but she felt far away from it all. She had been trying to make sense of everything for weeks now. Writing helped a little, but it wasn't enough. The thoughts in her head were too heavy to carry alone. She glanced across the field and saw her history teacher, Mr. Carter. He was sitting on a bench, reading a book. Mr. Carter was different from the other teachers. He didn't avoid tough conversations, and he made every student feel like their opinions mattered. Amara hesitated. Could she trust him? Taking a deep breath, she walked over. Mr. Carter? She asked quietly. He looked up and smiled. Amara, what's on your mind? Amara fidgeted with the strap of her bag. Do you have a minute? Of course, he said, closing his book and patting the bench beside him. Amara sat down. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap and stared at the ground. Her heart was racing. What if he didn't understand? What if he thought she was just making a big deal out of nothing? But then she remembered Olivia's words. Your feelings matter. It's hard to explain, Amara said softly. Something happened at the hospital. Mr. Carter nodded. Take your time, he said gently. Amara slowly told him what had happened. She talked about the doctor's smirk, his cold tone, and the comment about her skin. She kept her eyes on the ground, afraid to see Mr. Carter's reaction. When she finished, there was a long silence. Amara braced herself, expecting him to brush it off. But instead, he let out a quiet sigh. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Amara, he said. No one deserves to be treated that way. Amara looked up, surprised. You believe me? Of course I do, Mr. Carter said firmly. What the doctor said wasn't just mean, it was wrong. And it's okay to feel hurt about it. A lump formed in Amara's throat, and her eyes filled with tears. For the first time since the accident, she felt a little lighter. How do you deal with it, she asked. When people treat you differently because of who you are? Mr. Carter's face softened. It's not always easy, he said. But I've learned that my worth isn't defined by what others think or say. It's defined by how I see myself and how I treat others. Amara nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. You've already taken a big step by talking about it, Mr. Carter said with a kind smile. That shows courage. And if you ever need someone to listen, you know where to find me. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Amara stood up. Her heart felt a little lighter, as if a small part of the heavy feeling inside her had been lifted. Thank you, she said, her voice steady. Any time, Mr. Carter replied. As she walked back to class, Amara realized something. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel so alone. She still had a long way to go, but now she felt like she had someone in her corner. That made the journey ahead seem less scary. In history class, she opened her notebook to take notes. In the margins, she found herself writing a sentence she hadn't thought about before. My voice matters. The sun hung low in the sky as Amara walked home from school. Her bag was slung over her shoulder. The cool breeze played with her curls, and the air smelled faintly of blooming flowers. It had been a few days since her talk with Mr. Carter. Those days had been full of small, steady changes. At first, it was little things. Amara wrote more in her journal. She noticed how her body felt tense when someone said something hurtful or dismissive. She started to recognize her feelings instead of ignoring them. Little by little, those small steps began to add up. Amara also began to talk to her parents about the accident. At first, she didn't share everything, just small pieces to see how they would react. To her relief, they listened. Her mom's face softened with worry as she held Amara close. Her dad frowned and said, You didn't deserve that, Amara. You never deserved to be treated like that, her mom said, pulling her into a hug. Hearing them say that made Amara feel safe. It gave her the courage to share more with them. When Amara turned the corner onto her street, she saw her little brother, Jaden. He was playing with their neighbor's dog in the front yard. Jaden waved at her with a big grin, and Amara waved back. She felt lighter than she had in a long time. That evening, dinner was warm and happy. Her family sat around the table, talking and laughing about their day. Amara joined in, something she hadn't done much since the accident. Her parents noticed the change in her and shared a quiet look, but they didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Later, Amara sat at her desk, her journal open to a fresh page. This time, the words came easily. There was no hesitation or fear. Today, I told Priya that I believed her when she said she didn't like how the older kids treated her. She smiled at me like it mattered. And maybe it did. I don't know if I'll ever be able to change the way people act, but I think I'm starting to change the way I feel about myself. I'm not small. I'm not invisible. I'm not what people assume I am. I'm Amara, and that's enough. She closed her journal and leaned back in her chair. A quiet sense of accomplishment filled her. The next day, Amara walked into school with her head held high. As she passed Priya in the hallway, she gave her a warm smile. Priya smiled back. It was a small moment, but it felt big to Amara. In history class, Mr. Carter called on her to answer a question. Amara's heart raced, but she spoke clearly. When Mr. Carter nodded and said, "Excellent point, Amara," she felt a surge of pride. The world wasn't suddenly fair or perfect. There were still moments that hurt, like when a shop clerk barely looked at her mom or when a teacher skipped over her question in favor of someone else. But Amara knew now that those moments didn't define her. She was learning to see herself in her own way, not through the eyes of others. And as she left school that afternoon, the sun shining brightly above her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that her voice mattered. Hope that, little by little, she could handle a world that wasn't always kind or fair. Most importantly, hope that being herself, just as she was more than enough. As Amara walked home, she spotted Olivia, the kind nurse, stepping out of the clinic across the street. Amara hesitated for a moment, then raised her hand in a wave. Olivia noticed her and waved back with a warm smile. Seeing her reminded Amara of where this journey had started. Amara smiled to herself and kept walking. Her steps felt light, her heart steady. She didn't have all the answers, and that was okay. For now, it was enough to know she was moving forward, getting stronger with every step. With each beat of her heart, Amara carried a quiet strength. She knew now that she mattered, and that was a strength no one could take away.